AMD claimed RDNA3 provided a 50% performance per watt improvement over last generation. But we don't see RX 7000 GPUs with 50% more performance or with much lower power consumption. What does a direct comparison of RDNA3 versus RDNA2 really show? And did AMD lie? Let's get into it. AMD has been making consistent claims about 50% performance per watt ever since the launch of the RDNA1 architecture back in 2019. But with RDNA3, those claims seem to be a far stretch given the performance we have seen this generation. To get a good comparison with performance per watt, we need to understand the performance versus watt. For RDNA2, I purchased an RX 6600 XT secondhand for a direct comparison to the RDNA3 based 7600. With the 6600 XT, I wanted to baseline the performance versus the power like I did with the 7600 in my last video. The complication with using the 6600 is that AMD's Adrenalin software reports TGP, the total graphics power used by just the GPU chip, and not TBP, or total board power used by the entire graphics card. However, by measuring the power from the wall, I am able to determine the TBP for this comparison. This is a plot of the average FPS in Wildlife Extreme versus total board power of the 6600 XT. You can see that at the rated TBP, it achieves 100 FPS. The rated TBP is 160 watts, however, my 6600 XT runs closer to 165 watts. But that doesn't matter much since the curve is extremely flat at those power levels and the difference is less than a half a frame and essentially a rounding error. As the performance is reduced 10% to 90 FPS, the power is now 102 watts. And then, as the power is reduced all the way down to just half, or 80 watts, the performance drops to 81 FPS. That's pretty incredible. You cut the power in half and the performance only drops about 20%. I can see why RDNA2 is a good GPU for a laptop. What is interesting is when we compare RDNA2 to RDNA3. So here is the power scaling of the 7600 I did in my last video added to this chart. At their stock, out-of-the-box configuration and rated power levels, the 32 compute units of RDNA3 in the 7600 averages 110 FPS, while the 32 compute units of RDNA2 in the 6600 XT averages 100 FPS. So at first glance, RDNA3 seems to be providing a 10% improvement, matching what Hardware and Box showed in a 15-game average. Another interesting characteristic is that you see a different scaling curve. Where the 7600 has the rapid drop-off characteristic like we saw with the 4070 and 4070 Ti, the 6600 XT has a much more gradual drop. And if you look at the point where they achieve the same performance, in this case 97 FPS, you can see that RDNA2 is using 42% more power than RDNA3, and you could make the claim that at that specific point, RDNA3 is providing a 42% performance per watt improvement over RDNA2, and that sounds pretty good. Then again, you could also look at the crossover point where they both achieve 84 FPS at 85 watts and say RDNA3 provides no performance per watt improvement. After seeing the two curves on one chart, I wondered if that 54% performance per watt claim for the 7900 XTX that Dr. Lisa Su proclaimed to the world was done using a similar method. And sure enough, after digging into the footnotes, the 54% claim is based on a 7900 XTX running at a reduced power of 300 watts. Never mind that the XTX is sold to the public with a TBP of 355 watts, and there is not one released BIOS in the world that is programmed to run the XTX at 300 watts. Nope. AMD conveniently lowered the power of the 7900 XTX down to 300 watts so that they could make the claim of 54% performance per watt. How disappointing and how very misleading. It's misleading since you can't buy the XTX with a 300 watt BIOS. If AMD does not sell it in that configuration to the public, then isn't it a lie? I wondered if that method could be used to make that same 50% performance per watt claim with the 7600. Just take the 7600 and reduce the power down below what it is programmed to run in the BIOS until you find a favorable enough point. As I showed in my last video, as the 7600 drops to 100 FPS, the power drops to 105 watts. So if I do the calculation where they both achieve 100 FPS, but the 6600 XT requires 160 watts, and the 7600 only requires 105 watts, when you do the calculation for the improvement, you get 52% performance per watt. Woohoo! I did it! I found the infamous 50% performance per watt, just like AMD did with the 7900 XTX. My 7600 based on RDNA3 is 52% performance per watt better than RDNA2. Woo! And the whole claim just leaves me rather empty. NVIDIA did something similar with Ampere when they claimed it was much more efficient. And I can tell you that no gamer thinks of the Ampere generation of GPUs as being efficient. So AMD is no better than NVIDIA. AMD needs to be better. If they're not better, then why not just buy NVIDIA? The whole 50% performance per watt claim is really just misinformation. In the end, the only claim that should matter is comparing the performance using the settings that is programmed into the GPU's BIOS in the cards you can actually buy. The 7600 has a TBP of 165 watts, and the 6600 XT has a TBP of 160 watts. And since we know the 7600 is 10% faster, the real performance per watt improvement, as they are programmed to run in the BIOS and as it can be purchased, is just 6.7%. Claim 50% performance per watt in the presentations and have thousands of media outlets repeat that information. Then deliver 6.7% and nobody says anything. I am sure AMD will continue to use that broad claim of 50% performance per watt. And why not? They are never called out on it. And AMD executives likely base their bonuses on achieving that metric. Let's face it, there's no standard test to demonstrate that metric. Just make up the test every generation to make it fit the claim, and then go collect the large bonus. If you enjoyed this fresh look and analysis, like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below if you think making a claim on a product running on a BIOS configuration that is not sold to the public is a lie. You know, if AMD wants to make superfluous claims just so they can look good at technical conferences like Hot Chips, then good for them, I could care less. But when they make these claims to the general public who pays money to buy those GPUs, and those GPUs that are purchased do not demonstrate those benefits out of the box, then it's misleading. And if a company is misleading, I don't trust them. And if I don't trust them, why do I want to do business with them? AMD really needs to do better. Next up, I'll be taking an even closer look at RDNA3 versus RDNA2 and test them on an equal basis to uncover the real performance gains from the new RDNA3 architecture. If you haven't seen my power scaling videos on the RTX 4070 or 4070 Ti, check out one of these. Thank you all so very much for watching. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.